What if there were a manuscript that changed everything you thought about Medjugorje'S? Imagine finding, among yellowed pages and faded writing, phrases that seem like ancient whispers, phrases capable of rekindling faith, provoking doubts, and rewriting the way we interpret Mary's apparitions. Have you ever experienced this? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you and perhaps challenge previously held convictions. In the next few minutes, I want you to put yourself in this scenario with me. A small room lit by a dim bulb, the smell of dust and paper, and a document hidden for decades that no one dared to release. It's not just another sensational find. It's a possible fragment of the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje'S, those messages rumored to have been kept secret for reasons that combine devotion and fear. Throughout this introduction, I'll show you why this lost Medjugorje'S manuscript has attracted attention, which phrases point to signs in the sky or warnings of family protection, and why researchers and devotees are divided between belief and suspicion. When many people hear about Medjugorje'S, they think of the apparitions, the visionaries, and the praying crowds. But few imagine that there are hidden lines that speak of urgent calls to conversion, public signs that could appear in the sky, and even practical instructions for blessing and protecting one's home. These ideas don't just appear in isolation. They are intertwined with witness accounts, testimonies, and now, with the possible manuscript that some describe as a key to deciphering the unrevealed messages. The manuscript, if authentic, not only expands what was already known about the Medjugorje'S messages, but also raises difficult questions about authority, interpretation, and who has the right to spread a truth when it so deeply affects people's faith. I know that, for many, talking about unrevealed messages sounds like dangerous ground. There's a risk of manipulation and the danger of fueling theories that frighten rather than enlighten. Therefore, throughout this video, we will carefully separate what appears to be historical from what is conjecture, examining excerpts, sources, and possible implications. I'm not here to forcibly convert anyone. I'm here to present facts, report reactions, and help you discern clearly. After all, the search for truth requires intellectual and spiritual honesty, and that's what I propose to do, with respect and responsibility. That's we progress. You'll hear phrases from the manuscript that many find provocative, commands for communal prayer at specific times, references to signs in the sky that would be interpreted as warnings, and recommendations for protecting the family through ancient spiritual practices. Each passage will be read carefully, and each interpretation will be weighed in light of testimonies and analysis. I want you to ask yourself, how would your community react if these phrases were made public tomorrow? Would you feel protected, frightened, or strengthened? Share your thoughts in the comments below as you watch, because your personal experiences are an important part of this dialogue, and I'll read the most relevant stories. Before we move on to the excerpts and the reactions of experts and psychics, I want you to maintain an open heart and mind. Not everything that shines is true. Not every revelation is proof. But neither can we dismiss something that can transform lives without seriously examining it. Now, take a deep breath, because in the next part, we'll open the manuscript and read the sentences that many swear can change everything. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, or how you felt upon hearing these first words. Your story matters and can help others see this mystery from a new perspective. Sharing experiences in the comments isn't just a personal gesture, it's a way to build a community that seeks verification, prayer, and a balance between faith and reason. If you've been through something similar, share it here. If you have doubts or fears, write in. I read everything, and when it makes sense, I'll include the most compelling stories in future videos. And if this topic resonated with you, please like the video. A simple like helps the algorithm bring this conversation to those who also need to hear it, and keep the investigation into the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje alive. Subscribing to the channel makes even more of a difference. When you subscribe, you're saying you want more serious content, more interviews, more documents, and more context. This gives us the energy to responsibly check sources, interview experts, and continue bringing you previously unreleased content. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content, transforming research into dialogue and faith into mutual care. So, comment, like, and subscribe if you want to continue this journey with me now. Without losing the thread of the story, let's turn the page and read carefully. The first sentences of the lost manuscript. Medjugorje is a small village in Bosnia and Herzegovina that since 1981 has become a spiritual meeting point for millions of people worldwide. It was there that 6 young people claimed to have seen and heard the Virgin Mary for the first time, atop a hill known as Podbrdo. This experience completely changed their lives and began a phenomenon that continues to this day. Since then, reports of apparitions, messages, and signs have been repeated, always with a tone of call to conversion, prayer, and reconciliation with God. This is why the name Medjugorje attracts so much attention. It is not just a sacred place, but a continuous invitation to reflect on our choices, our daily decisions, and even the course of humanity. These apparitions weren't confined to the past. Many of the visionaries are still alive and continue to share messages they received, some public, others kept secret. This is crucial. Each of them carries with them what are called the secrets of Medjugorje, which are 10 prophetic messages with instructions and warnings for the world. 7 of these messages, it is said, have not yet been revealed. It is precisely at this point that curiosity and mystery meet. The mere fact that hidden words exist, kept from the public for decades, awakens in people a desire to understand the reasoning behind this choice. Why not reveal everything at once? What could be so impactful that it needs to be saved for the right moment? Several scholars, journalists, and theologians have already studied this phenomenon, attempting to separate faith from superstition, spiritual experience from personal interpretation. There are reports of witnesses who claim to have seen lights in the sky, heard chants, or felt a profound peace while visiting the site. Others, more skeptical, have investigated historical documents and pointed out inconsistencies, suggesting caution. This mixture of devotion and criticism is what keeps the subject alive. It cannot be fully explained and continues to challenge our rational mindset. And that is precisely what makes it so fascinating, the intersection of mystery and personal transformation. When we talk about a lost manuscript related to Medjugorje, we're dealing with something that touches on the behind the scenes of this phenomenon. It could contain phrases that have never reached the public, perhaps words that explain the order of future events or indicate specific signs to recognize heaven's callings. This kind of revelation would have a huge impact, because it could change the way millions of people prepare spiritually and even how they deal with their own lives. Imagine how many decisions would be made differently if these messages came to light. Today's decisions about faith, family, forgiveness, and even how to face global crises. For some, these apparitions are the greatest sign of modern times. For others, they're simply a collective psychological phenomenon. But regardless of your perspective, it's impossible to ignore the significance of this story. People from all over the world travel there, stand in long lines to climb the hill, pray before statues, and share their own experiences of transformation. Many say they leave renewed, with a new mindset about what truly matters. And it's precisely this search for meaning that connects you, watching now. To all the pilgrims who have passed through Medjugorje over the past 4 decades, now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding Medjugorje also means understanding a little about how we deal with the invisible, with that which we cannot control. It's about realizing that our spiritual journey is not made up solely of ready-made answers, but also of questions that require silence, reflection, and discernment. The lost manuscript, if it truly exists, could be an invitation to delve into this place of introspection and courage to face the hidden truth that may lie before us. Each word that emerges from these pages is like a key that opens an inner door, a door that many may be afraid to cross, because it forces us to reconsider choices, forgive people, and abandon habits that distance us from what we believe to be good. As we unravel these layers, it becomes clear that the impact is not just religious, but human. The messages speak of conversion, but also of responsibility, of how our attitudes influence the world around us. When we talk about signs in the sky, for example, what is being suggested is that visible events will provoke a collective change of mindset, a mass awakening to something greater than everyday life. This brings hope to many, but it can also cause fear. After all, the idea that something grand and uncontrollable is coming can generate anxiety. That's why these messages need to be read with balance, always seeking the sense of positive transformation they convey. The fascinating thing is that Medjugorje doesn't just offer a mystery spectacle, but a practical way of life. Daily prayer, fasting, confession, scripture reading, and active participation in the community. These simple elements are proposed as a kind of spiritual shield, a way to prepare the mind and heart for times of trial. It's as if the messages say, don't wait for the great signs to happen to change. Start now. And this is powerful because it places the responsibility in our hands, not in destiny or future events. And here's the most intriguing part. If the manuscript truly contains previously unpublished phrases, it could reveal not only what will happen, but also why. And understanding the why is what gives meaning to our actions. Without this understanding, we risk turning everything into superstition or collective panic. But when we understand the reason behind the warnings, we can act wisely, prepare our families, and strengthen our communities constructively. This is perhaps the greatest lesson of Medjugorje'S, that the future isn't simply waiting to happen. It's being built now by the decisions we make. Comment: this makes sense to me. I want to know if this deeper look at Medjugorje also awakens in you this mixture of curiosity and responsibility that is stirring in me as I speak. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And the best way to understand why this manuscript resonates so strongly with people is to hear how it came to be, not as an official statement, but as a behind-the-scenes find. one that combines chance, courage, and a touch of fear. They say it was found by chance during a cleanup of an old parish building on the outskirts of Medjugorje, place that housed forgotten archives and objects from the time when the first apparitions began to attract pilgrims. The storyteller prefers to remain private, but the accounts coincide in sensory details that make the scene almost cinematic. A cramped room, stuffy air, a dust-covered wooden cabinet, and, beneath layers of newspapers and cloth, a small wooden box with a loose lock. Upon opening, the smell of old paper filled the room. The pages were yellowed, with stains that spoke of years of silence. The letters, some in faded ink, others hastily scratched, seemed written by hands that wanted to be remembered but also feared the consequences of what they left behind. Those who encountered the contents, a local archivist, a woman who helped in the sacristy, and a young researcher visiting the parish out of curiosity, report feeling a mixture of reverence and apprehension. It wasn't an official document like a decree. It was more intimate, like the notes of someone saving urgent advice for difficult times. In the margins were scribbles, incomplete dates, and names that seemed to indicate people close to the visionaries. Many, as they leafed through it, began to associate those lines with the idea of hidden truth, phrases that, for some reason, never reached the general public. And here comes the hook that everyone later repeated in hushed tones in the village. The following phrases were censored, according to whoever kept them. This statement spread like wildfire because it touches a sensitive point in the collective mind, the possibility that something important was withheld for the right moment or simply suppressed for fear of repercussions. The word censorship carries weight. It suggests decisions, conflicts, power plays, and community protection. For some, censoring is about protecting. For others, it's about hiding. And this dichotomy sets the tone for the investigation. It's impossible to separate the discovery from the human history surrounding it, from the intentions and fears of those who handled that role. The journey of returning these phrases to the public, therefore, is not just technical, it's moral. It involves decisions that can alter mindsets, provoke personal and collective transformations, and even redefine how people interpret spiritual signs. Upon closer inspection, the manuscript revealed short, almost aphoristic phrases and practical instructions, recommendations for family prayer nights, guidelines for fasting during certain periods, and hints about signs in the sky that should be observed as public signals. There were also emotional appeals, calls for communities to unite, to avoid internal divisions, and to prioritize care for the most vulnerable. The combination of the practical and the prophetic gives the text enormous impact. It is not just words that speak of future events, but instructions that call for an immediate change in decisions and behaviors. Readers sense that the proposed transformation is not only spiritual, but also social, a call to reorganize priorities, reevaluate relationships, and take responsibility. At the heart of this discovery lies an inevitable tension, the desire to reveal versus the fear of impact. Some who had brief access chose to photograph excerpts and take copies for analysis, seeking the security of multiple opinions. Others felt it was their obligation to take the manuscript to religious authorities, trusting that an institutional decision could protect the community from misinterpretation. This duality between openness and caution reveals the behind-the-scenes nature of faith in action, behind the public prayers and processions. There are people pondering and making decisions whose repercussions can reach millions. And when we talk about impact, we don't just mean in the spiritual sense. Think about the human and practical repercussions. An instruction to bless a house in a specific way, for example, can become a ritual replicated in thousands of homes. A date or sign in the sky can trigger waves of expectation and, for some, fear. The responsibility of dealing with something like this is enormous, because the effect on the community goes far beyond the initial intentions. It affects attention spans, family routines, and even political choices in times of tension. Therefore, many experts in contemporary religiosity warn of the need for careful analysis, historical contextualization, and the search for reliable sources before transforming a found fragment into dogma or an urgent agenda. Despite this, there is something deeply human in the need to know, to understand why certain words were written and why they remained hidden. Hidden truth, when revealed, has the power to provoke a profound reorientation not only of beliefs, but of one's own personal journey. The messages, by their very nature, invite reflection on priorities, on what truly matters in the small, everyday decisions. It is as if the manuscript were a mirror that gives the community a clear vision of the choices it must make to face potential trials. This is the transformation many seek, an awakening that affects both the spirit and practical life. It's also important to remember that not all discoveries generate consensus. While some see confirmation and reinforcement of their faith, others see a risk of manipulation. The story of discovery is, therefore, also the story of how we interpret signals and how we decide to act. Everyone who touches these pages brings with them a wealth of experience, a mindset shaped by losses, victories, and quests. This is why the manuscript, even before being read aloud in its entirety, has already fulfilled one of its roles. It sparked dialogue, raised questions, and encouraged people to reevaluate their personal decisions. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because looking only at the found object is insufficient compared to the human complexity that surrounds it. It's necessary to listen to experts, to listen to visionaries, to listen to those who harbor fear and those who harbor hope, and to do this exercise with humility. The revelations, however closely listed in the yellowed pages, only make sense when placed in the right context, when cross-referenced with testimonies, historical documents, and the wisdom of those who understand the intricacies of mystical experiences. It is this interweaving of clues and voices that gives the find its true value, not as absolute proof, but as a relevant piece in a tapestry of stories that make up the history of Medjugorje. Comment below, this makes sense to me. I want to read how this part of the story resonates with you, with your doubts, fears, or hopes, before we move on to carefully reading the excerpts. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and the time has come to truly open the manuscript. Feel the weight of the words, and let them speak for themselves, with the pause they deserve, like someone reading slowly so that each syllable resonates in the soul. Imagine the soundtrack fading, the close-up on the yellowed paper, the camera on the letters trembling slightly, and then, with a low, reverent voice, the first lines emerge. When heaven speaks, let no one look to their own fears. Unite in prayer, and the light will see for you. Pause. Let silence fill the room for 2 seconds. Feel the impact of this simple, direct phrase. If this is true, it changes everything. Not only the way we await signs, but the mindset of entire communities that organize themselves around rituals and expectations. The word heaven here is not just a poetic image. It is a call to public vigilance, an invitation to concrete change in the daily decisions that shape families and cities. Carefully turning the page, another sentence appears, shorter, almost like a warning scrawled by someone writing under stress. The family that sanctifies itself will receive a shield of peace. Protect the home with prayer and reconciliation. Another pause. The tone changes, there's practical instruction mixed with the promise. It's not abstract doctrine, it's guidance for transforming routine. Before leaving for work, make a gesture of blessing. Before sleeping, look at the person living next door and ask for forgiveness. This kind of recommendation has a direct impact on relationships, on the priority of decisions, on rebuilding bonds that, in many places, are eroded by the rush and distractions of everyday life. Think about the scope of this, a spiritual practice proposed as a method of defense, capable of altering behaviors, reducing conflicts, and creating a new mindset of mutual care. The intervention moves from the symbolic to the practical, and this transition is what makes the reading so disturbing in a good way, because it affects what people do, not just what they believe. The third line, shorter, written in a less firm handwriting, as if jotting something down hurriedly during an anxious night, reads, "Fasting is not punishment. It is clarity to see the right time." This phrase sounds like the backstage of a spiritual discipline that aims not at fear, but at lucidity, and invitation to an inner journey that prepares the mind to discern and resist collective panic. Placed alongside the others, it forms a powerful triangle: public signs, family protection, and inner discipline. Together, these fragments suggest a roadmap for action that combines exteriority and intimacy, community practices and personal choices. It's almost like receiving a practical manual for a planned spiritual transformation, instructions for changing habits, aligning decisions, and building resilience. Reading these phrases aloud, a weight grows in the air. Some people, hearing these lines for the first time, felt peace. Others, unease. There's a reason. Hidden truth, when it begins to become visible, produces different reactions depending on each person's background. For those who already experience a routine of prayer and fasting, the words reinforce a life already sought. For those who live without these rituals, they sound like an unexpected call, capable of provoking a profound rethinking of priorities. And therein lies the dilemma. Revealing the message can strengthen those who already believe, but it can also instigate sudden changes in unprepared communities, generating a positive impact in some cases, and uncertainty in others. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, voices are emerging, urging caution. Researchers who examine ancient manuscripts know that context matters. The date, the author, the circumstances of writing, and margin notes made by others can transform a reading. Someone could have made a personal interpretation, jotted down fears or hopes in moments of crisis, and this would be mistaken for a prophetic message. Therefore, while we feel the emotional power of the phrases, we need to apply tools of verification and interpretation. Truth is not imposed solely by its effect. It is sustained by historical coherence, transparency in the document's chain of custody, and the convergence of reliable testimonies. But don't be swayed by cold skepticism. There's something deeply human in the search for meaning these lines reveal. People who have read and reflected on these excerpts have reported concrete decisions. Rapprochement between siblings changing eating habits to include moments of silence. Family prayer nights that led to long-delayed These are real, flesh and blood transformations that show how a simple phrase can reshape routines and priorities. The suggested transformation isn't just spiritual, it's social and even psychological. By prioritizing reconciliation and care, small communities can become more resilient in the face of greater adversity. And when we think about the concept of impact at scale, our imaginations become restless. If these phrases were to circulate en masse, how would cities, networks, and even religious leaders react? Renewal movements, community support programs, and collective practices could emerge that would quickly change the face of neighborhoods and villages. On the other hand, without proper context, these words could also fuel fanaticism or expectations that generate collective anxiety. Responsibility, therefore, lies twofold: on the one who reveals them and on the one who receives them. Revelations without context can be hurtful. Contextualizations that impoverish the message also lose their essence. And that's why reading the manuscript aloud, in front of a camera, has an almost ritualistic effect. We don't just show what's written, but we take on the task of mediating its interpretation, of offering frameworks and clues that help discernment. Every pause, every emphasis, and every breath during the reading becomes part of the process of translation between aging paper and concrete lives that can be transformed by it. Thus, reading these 2 or 3 sentences is not an end, but a beginning and invitation to delve deeper, contextualize, and, above all, decide responsibly. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to read how those words resonate with you as we continue to unfold the evidence, the reactions, and the possible consequences of these revelations. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because reading sentences on paper is one thing, understanding what they actually provoke in people's lives is quite another. When we talk about what these lines mean in practice, we need to separate 2 layers. The immediate consequence changes a community's daily life in the following weeks and months, and the symbolic, long-term consequence, the profound revisions of mindset, priorities, and the spiritual journey itself that lasts for years. This distinction is essential to avoid confusing impulsive reaction with mature transformation. In the immediate future, consider the more practical instructions that emerged from the manuscript: daily blessings, family prayer times, instructions for fasting at specific times. These guidelines, when replicated, change routines. Families who previously ate dinner in silence can begin to pray together. Neighbors who lived behind closed doors can be encouraged to ask for forgiveness and reconcile old wounds. This generates a tangible impact: a decrease in domestic conflicts, a strengthening of community bonds, and a reorganization of daily decisions in favor of practices that prioritize presence, care, and attention to others. It's a practical transformation, often small in appearance, enormous in effect because it changes how people spend their time and energy. Another immediate consequence stems from the idea of public signs in the sky. When a community begins to expect visible signs, a collective expectation is born that can mobilize masses. People may travel to the hills, hold night vigils, and even organize reception facilities for pilgrims. This has concrete effects: growing religious tourism, a buoyant local economy, but also the risk of mass hysteria and service overload. Administrative decisions must be made: how to organize spaces, how to ensure security, how to deal with emotional outbursts. In extreme situations, poorly contextualized guidance can generate panic. For example, if someone announces a date and people drastically change their routines, the practical responsibility of those who spread such statements is, therefore, enormous. One word can trigger a chain of actions that truly impact lives. However, reducing these phrases to mere practicality would miss the point. The symbolic impact, at the level of mentality and inner transformation, is where the hidden truth, revealed by a manuscript, can be most powerful and lasting. When words invite conversion, reconciliation, and fasting understood as clarity, they are offering a proposal for existential changes in mindset. Don't happen overnight, but a phrase can be the trigger. Someone reads "protect the home with prayer and reconciliation" and decides, for the first time, to prioritize relationships over material gains. This decision, in turn, can reverberate in larger choices in the way they raise their children, in their volunteer work, in their financial priorities. Transformation, in this sense, is slow, often invisible to the casual observer, but profound in the fabric of life. There are also psychological consequences that deserve attention. Messages that announce signs or warnings can generate hope in those seeking meaning, but also anxiety in those already living in a state of vulnerability. Sensitively reading these phrases requires a mindset that balances hope and sobriety, offering paths of action that emancipate rather than paralyze. Here comes a practical and ethical need behind the scenes. Those who mediate these revelations need to anticipate the emotional impact and offer support guides, communities, counseling so that the revelation doesn't become a burden. Furthermore, there is a social and institutional impact. If sections of the manuscript guide community practices, local leaders' religious, social, and even administrative will play a central role in responsibly integrating these practices. This involves strategic decisions, how to communicate without alarming, how to validate historically without suppressing spiritual meaning, how to create protocols that preserve the integrity of families and the safety of individuals. Institutional action can both mitigate risks and amplify benefits, depending on the quality of the decisions. Therefore, the practical impact is also a matter of community governance. Separating hypothesis from symbolism also requires method. Some phrases may point to immediate consequences, such as operational instructions. Others, using metaphorical language, require a symbolic reading that encompasses multiple interpretations. For example, when the sky speaks can be interpreted literally as atmospheric phenomenon, symbolically as collective signs of a shift in consciousness. Each interpretation demands different responses. A literal interpretation requires observation and logistics. A symbolic interpretation requires catechesis, formation, and dialogue. Community intelligence consists of articulating these interpretations, establishing priorities, and protecting the community from hasty decisions. In terms of cultural transformation, these revelations can alter local narratives. A village previously known for migration and spiritual indifference can become a hub of renewal, with practices of care and hospitality that transform economic and emotional relationships. In practice, this means new solidarity networks, family support initiatives, and prayer groups that become social projects. The impact, therefore, transcends the intimate and reaches the public. Individual decisions nurture a new social fabric, but it's also important to remember the risks of exploitation. Powerful phrases can be appropriated by leaders for less noble purposes, manipulating fears, raising funds, or exerting social control. Therefore, the ethics of disclosure are crucial. The responsibility of those who expose these revelations is to construct frameworks that promote discernment, indicating sources, authors, and context, avoiding interpretations that transform the message into a tool for pressure or profit. There is also a less obvious, practical field, the interface between faith and social science. Researchers and historians, by analyzing dates, handwriting, and context, help clarify authenticity and provenance, which in turn guides community decisions. This behind-the-scenes dialogue between experts, seers, and communities is an essential part of the journey. Without it, hidden truth remains an enigma. With it, revelation can be responsibly integrated. When we think about individual decisions, the key question is, what kind of change are you willing to adopt in light of these statements? Practical reading requires concrete choices, setting aside time for family prayer, opening a channel of dialogue with neighbors, prioritizing reconciliation, practicing fasting as intentional clarity. These small decisions, taken together, form a path of transformation. Collective decisions, on the other hand, involve planning, institutional dialogue, and care to ensure a constructive impact. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding the practical implications opens the door to analyzing how reactions unfold at the emotional, social, and institutional levels. The next part of our conversation will examine how leaders, experts, and residents reacted to these phrases in the days following the discovery, and what this teaches us about the responsibility of dealing with revelations that impact real life. Comment: this makes sense to me now. I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And the best way to understand the true weight of these phrases is to hear how they resonated beyond the page. In the voices of those who received them, each reaction reveals a fragment of hidden truth and shows how the revelations become, practice, human decisions with concrete impact. I begin with the voices that most quickly moved from amazement to action. The devotees. For many pilgrims and nearby residents, those lines were like water on dry land. When I read them, I felt peace and urgency at the same time, said one woman who began gathering her family together every night after hearing the excerpts. Another stated, in a trembling voice, that the phrase about protecting the home made us talk again after years of silence. These emotional reactions are not just anecdotal. In small communities, small gestures of reconciliation reverberate. People have prioritized prayer, again, instituted simple domestic rituals, and shared stories of inner transformation that, in their daily lives, have resulted in changes in mindset and priorities. For those on this journey, the manuscript feels like an invitation to transformation, a gentle push to reorganize decisions and take care of what really matters. In contrast, there is the voice of researchers and historians, those who examine the document from the perspective of methodology with a mindset of verification and reconstruction of context. It is necessary to evaluate handwriting, paper, ink, and chain of custody before concluding anything. say some experts. Others emphasize the importance of cross-referencing testimonies and historical documents to verify coherence. This cautious perspective is not intellectual aridity. It is an exercise in responsibility that seeks to protect the community against hasty interpretations. Researchers point out that even authentic texts can undergo additions or marginal notes that alter the original meaning, and that the impact of an isolated sentence can be amplified by those who receive it without the correct framework. Thus, the academic voice calls for calm, method, and transparency, essential elements for the revelation to have a sustainable impact and not become a source of misinformation. Between these two extremes, skeptics emerge, their reaction more visceral and, at times, suspicious. There are always vested interests behind documents that appear out of nowhere, some critics assert. Others point out that collective protests can result from mass psychological processes. This stance, while sometimes harsh, has a healthy role. It forces fact-checking and makes it difficult for unfounded narratives to spread unchecked. Skeptics also highlight practical risks, from social panic to the emotional exploitation of vulnerable people, and call for clear protocols on how to disseminate and interpret such sensitive findings. When mistrust is well informed, it acts as a necessary counterbalance to euphoria, helping to preserve the integrity of community decisions against potential manipulation. By listening to these three voices simultaneously, we realize that interpreting a manuscript is not a neutral act. It is a moral negotiation between faith, reason, and responsibility. Devotion drives immediate action. Research seeks structure and security. Skepticism demands safeguards. This triad forms the ecosystem in which any revelation is embedded. Understanding this ecosystem is essential to assessing the true impact of the phrases found. It's not just about proving the document's authenticity. It's about collectively deciding how to integrate its content without hurting people, without generating panic, and without allowing less noble interests to exploit the fervor of others. In practice, these voices have resulted in diverse initiatives, study groups formed by residents and researchers, mediated meetings with local leaders, and even attempts to create educational materials that could contextualize the passages without distorting them. In some communities, volunteers gathered to organize shelters for pilgrims and offer emotional support to those who felt shaken. In others, the manuscript sparked heated debates about spiritual authority. Who has the voice to interpret the messages? What institutions can validate or guide the practical application of the instructions? These questions led to decisions that vary from place to place, demonstrating that the same revelation can generate very different paths, depending on the mindset and leadership of each group. There are also reports of conflicts, divided families, arguments between religious and secular leaders, accusations of manipulation showing that the repercussions can be as destructive as they are edifying when accountability fails. These episodes are stark reminders. Any hidden truth that comes to light needs to be handled with institutional care and with communication strategies that protect the psychological and social well-being of communities. Practical experience has taught that simply revealing something isn't enough. It's necessary to create the conditions for the revelation to produce healthy transformation, not rupture. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because acting upon a revelation requires more than emotion, it requires a simple, practical, and compassionate method that protects lives and preserves hidden truth without suffocating it. When we talk about discernment, we're not inventing bureaucracy. We're proposing a mindset of responsibility that combines inner transformation with sound decisions. Below, I'll present you with a 3-step mini-guide, short, applicable, and designed for those who want to act with clarity without getting lost in dramatizations or hasty interpretations. Each step combines spiritual and informational elements, because the journey of a healthy community requires both prayer and verification, intimacy with the sacred, and rigor with the facts. Step 1. Verify sources and documentary context. Before transforming an ancient phrase into public guidance, it's essential to map out who wrote it, when, and under what circumstances. This isn't just academic technicality, it's a practical safeguard against hasty decisions that affect families and routines. Look for physical evidence such as handwriting, paper type, ink, and chain of custody records. Consult local historians or archivists who can contextualize the document within the historical context. If there are dates, compare them to known events. If there are names, try to confirm whether these people existed or are symbolic references. Verifying sources reduces the risk of transforming a private note, a personal annotation, or an emotional appeal into a collective prescription. Remember, authenticity doesn't automatically mean authority for immediate application, but without authenticity, any application is weakened. Taking this step is a practical decision that preserves the positive impact and minimizes harm. Step 2. Practice silence and prayer as instruments of clarity. Spiritual discernment is not the absence of reason. It is reason tempered by silence and inner listening. Set aside collective moments of silence, prayer, and reflection before acting. not as an empty ritual, but as a space to reorganize priorities and align decisions with the common good. Silence helps filter impulsive reactions and allows the community to perceive whether the proposed transformation is consistent with its vocation of care. Encourage simple practices. A time of family prayer to process emotions, small groups that read the text with moderation, and spiritual leaders who facilitate reflection without imposing conclusions. Prayer functions here as a method of mindset formation. It does not replace research, but illuminates human priorities where to invest energy. How to protect the most vulnerable. What kind of changes in everyday decisions are truly necessary? When faith meets method, revelations gain a mode of application that protects life and dignity. Step 3. Seek qualified input and build networks of accountability. No community is isolated. Good decisions emerge from the interaction between experts and residents. Seek advice from recognized spiritual guides, yes, but also from professionals who understand the social and psychological impacts, psychologists, social workers, historians, and community managers. Form a small advisory committee that reflects diversity, people of faith, academics, family representatives, and mental health professionals. This arrangement reduces the risk of instrumentalization and creates channels to mitigate practical harms, such as collective anxiety or decisions that affect livelihoods. Furthermore, promote transparency. Clearly communicate what is known, what is being verified, and what the interim recommendations are. Transparency is an antidote to rumors and the manipulation of interests. Responsible decisions arise from the convergence of what the heart feels and what reason proves. That is where transformation becomes sustainable. By applying these 3 steps, the community creates a culture of care that balances fervor and prudence. This doesn't eliminate emotion, or should it, but it frames it within practices that promote real, positive impact. For example, instead of decreeing mandatory fasting or organizing mass vigils without support, a community following this guide might choose to recommend voluntary fasting with medical guidance, organize vigils with psychological and logistical support, and promote reconciliation circles facilitated by trained professionals. These decisions demonstrate how small, aligned choices produce a sustainable shift in collective mindset and in how we respond to revelations. It's also important to consider protective measures for the most vulnerable, simple protocols, such as a phone number for emotional support, volunteer groups to assist families in distress, or partnerships with local institutions to ensure that religious practices don't harm livelihoods. These measures may seem overly pragmatic, but they convey the essence of true transformation: faith that cares, decisions that protect, revelations that generate service, not rupture. The impact we seek is not merely spiritual, it is human, concrete, and lasting. In the informational field, it's worth remembering that dialogue with the media requires clear rules. Avoid sensationalist interviews, opt for notes that explain the context. And, when there are public readings, accompany them with accessible documentation that allows third-party verification. This reduces the chance of translation and interpretation errors, which, in multilingual environments, often distort the original meaning. Similarly, when translations are circulated, it's essential to have reviews by multilingual experts to preserve nuances and avoid emotional escalations caused by linguistic misunderstandings. A discernment mindset also requires humility, a willingness to correct course when new evidence emerges. Revelations are rarely static. Investigation is a process. Hidden truth may be partial, symbolic, or written under circumstances that require critical reading. Therefore, building mechanisms for public review, documentation, and periodic reevaluation is a governance decision that protects the community from irrevocable decisions made hastily. Ultimately, the goal of these 3 steps is simple: to allow the discovery of something as sensitive as a lost manuscript to generate transformation, not destruction, to alter mindsets and decisions for the better, without opening the door to manipulation or panic. When courage is combined with method, when faith meets responsible criticism, the impact tends to be constructive. It is this combination that preserves both the mystery and the concrete lives of the people involved. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because, after seeing how to discern and act, we need to look at practical examples, real cases and testimonies that show us how these decisions were made in similar contexts, and what we can learn from them. Comment. This makes sense to me now. I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because imagining possibilities is part of our collective responsibility. We need to visualize both the light and the shadow to be able to make clearer decisions. Consider 2 contrasting scenarios, each with its own practical and emotional ramifications, to better understand the true scope of the discovery. In the first scenario, the best possible the manuscript is authentic. The phrases are legitimate and, when carefully integrated, they bring about a real transformation in people's lives. In this case, the hidden truth acts as a call that reorients mindsets, reinforces community ties, and encourages decisions that protect families and strengthen networks of solidarity. People who previously lived isolated come together again. Communities organize prayer and reconciliation routines that reduce conflict. Social initiatives emerge to support the most vulnerable. Local leaders work with historians and psychologists to create responsible implementation protocols. The practical impact is visible. Less domestic violence, more mutual support, quality, time dedicated to family and community care. Transformation doesn't happen overnight, but the seeds planted through the careful implementation of spiritual guidance bear lasting fruit in the effective economy of communities. In this scenario, the manuscript is respectfully studied behind the scenes, published with contextual notes, translated by multilingual experts, and accompanied by training programs that help integrate the revelations into sustainable life practices. The collective journey is strengthened. The hidden truth ceases to be an object of speculation and becomes an instrument for the common good, without losing its sacred character. Now consider the second scenario, the worst possible, in which the document is false, tampered with, or misinterpreted, and its disorderly circulation triggers panic, ruptures, and exploitation. In this scenario, out-of-context phrases become sensational headlines. Opportunistic leaders begin capitalizing on fears, organizing pilgrimages that charge for protection or selling religious items. Families make impulsive decisions, spending savings to follow supposed dates of signs in the sky. Communities polarize between fervent believers and enraged skeptics, generating isolation and conflict. The emotional impact is profound, widespread anxiety, a sense of betrayal among neighbors, and increased cases of stress and depression among people who feel pressured to act. Even worse, when the manipulation includes financial demands or social control, the community's historic trust is eroded, and rebuilding it requires time, dialogue, and many difficult decisions. At the institutional level, religious and civil authorities may be forced to respond with measures that, if poorly calibrated, increase the feeling of censorship or, conversely, legitimize dubious interpretations without proper verification. The consequence is an environment in which truth loses ground to emotional narratives, and the spiritual journey becomes, for many, a stage of dispute and fear. Between these extremes lies a whole range of hybrid possibilities: partially authentic revelations poorly communicated, legitimate documents containing marginal notes interpreted as prophecies, or genuine excerpts that, due to a lack of context, generate misunderstandings. Each of these variants requires different decisions, from clarification and education to damage mitigation measures. For example, if only part of the manuscript is verified as authentic, the prudent strategy would be to publish excerpts with critical notes, organize seminars with experts, and open channels of communication for the affected communities. If, on the other hand, fraud is discovered, a healthy community response involves processes of reconciliation, reparation, and education to prevent future manipulation. In all cases, the quality of decisions made in the first days after disclosure is crucial for the medium. In long-term impact, it's helpful for our collective mindset to enumerate how certain specific decisions can tilt the scenario for better or worse. Decisions that promote transparent dialogue between religious authorities, researchers, and the community tend to reduce harm and increase benefits. Responsible translation policies, the formation of interdisciplinary committees, and the creation of emotional support services are actions that move the context toward healing and transformation. Impulsive decisions, viral communications without verification, public readings without mediation, organizing mass events without infrastructure fuel, the worst-case scenario. The difference between these two trajectories is often a question of governance: who makes decisions, with what information, and with what ethical criteria. The emotional repercussions also deserve attention. In a positive scenario, the manuscript acts as a catalyst for hope and commitment. In a negative one, it can generate disillusionment, division, and fear. How communities respond to the revelation depends largely on leadership. Leaders who prioritize care, psychological support, and public education can transform a potentially chaotic impact into opportunities for learning and strengthening. On the other hand, opportunistic leaders generate losses of trust that are very difficult to reverse, and these losses materialize in less social cooperation, less civic engagement, and greater vulnerability to further manipulation. There is also the long-term dimension. The reputation of a place, a tradition, and individuals can be affected for decades, depending on how a hidden truth made public is handled. A transparent validation process, combined with practices of care and education, can transform a controversial discovery into a legacy of resilience. Neglect and exploitation can leave scars that are difficult to heal. Thus, responsibility for discovery is, in itself, a decision with a profound impact on the collective future. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because visualizing scenarios isn't about exercising indiscriminate pessimism or optimism. It's about preparing to act wisely, and acting wisely requires tools, verification protocols, support channels, networks of experts, and, above all, a mindset that combines faith and method. Throughout history, communities that prepare to deal with sensitive revelations have managed to transform shocks into opportunities for growth and reconstruction. That's what we need to strive for now, not just proving or disproving, but building pathways that protect people, preserve the truth, and encourage conscious transformation. Comment here. I'm on this journey too now. I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and before we close this section, I need to clearly recap what's at stake. Returning to the point that opened it all, the question that caught your attention from the beginning: what if there were a manuscript that changes everything you think about Medjugorje? This hypothesis isn't just a provocation to attract attention. It's a question that permeates decisions, emotions, and concrete destinies. Throughout this video, we've seen the smell of paper, heard voices divided between faith and skepticism, and read phrases that may seem simple at first glance, but which carry within them a weight capable of reordering priorities, transforming mindsets, and causing practical impacts on the lives of families and communities. The power of this discovery lies precisely in its ambivalence. It can be a seed of healing or a trigger for rupture, depending on how it is handled, interpreted, and communicated. And this is, ultimately, our collective responsibility, not to consume revelations as a spectacle, but to treat them with the respect and method that preserve people. To recap, this is a straightforward idea. A manuscript, when authentic, can guide practices of prayer, family protection, and inner discipline. When false or misinterpreted, it can generate panic, manipulation, and real harm. This bipolarity demands of us a posture that combines courage and prudence: courage to face the possibility of transformation, and prudence to establish protocols that prevent the hidden truth from becoming an instrument of fear or profit. Returning to the hook that opened this video, we realize that the initial question isn't simply intended to pique curiosity. It calls us to rethink decisions, to reevaluate the way we share spiritual accounts, and to recognize the importance of the behind-the-scenes aspects that underpin any serious investigation: documentary verification, pastoral care, and attention to psychological impacts. The powerful conclusion I want to leave flows from this tension between hope and responsibility. The sentences we read are not mere old texts. They are potential agents of change that demand framing. If treated methodically, source verification, historical analysis, pastoral care, and responsible communication, they can inspire real transformations, reconciliations, prayer practices that restore bonds, and a renewed priority for community life and mutual care. If, on the contrary, they become rhetorical weapons in self-serving hands, they can wound, divide, and disorient. The instrument we have at hand to tip the scales toward good is collective conscience, our way of deciding, of dialoguing with experts, of protecting the most vulnerable, and of contextualizing each passage so that it becomes light and not an uncontrolled flame. It's also important to recognize the emotional impact this discovery provokes. For many, there's relief and hope, because a single sentence can be the spark that reignites the practice of prayer and reconciliation. For others, the exposure of a hidden truth brings anxiety and fear, especially when the messages evoke public signals or warnings. Managing this impact is as practical as it is spiritual. It involves creating psychological support networks, listening channels for personal accounts, educational programs that explain contexts and motivations, and communication protocols that prioritize transparency. This combination, pastoral sensitivity coupled with investigative responsibilities, what ensures that the revelation fulfills its transformative role without degenerating into chaos. There's also the realm of collective and institutional decisions: who validates, who mediates, how to translate an ancient phrase into a contemporary practice that respects health, safety, and dignity. Answering these questions requires qualified leadership and democratic processes that include multidisciplinary experts. Experience shows that committees composed of historians, theologians, psychologists, and community representatives are better able to mitigate risks and promote benefits. They function as ethical and technical filters that simultaneously allow the community to experience spirituality and protect it from abuse. This governance is part of the transformation, changing mindsets, without losing sight of the practical consequences of the decisions we make. Returning to the heart of the matter, the hidden truth, when brought to light, presents us with a choice: to use knowledge to build or to control. Choosing to build means choosing practices that expand care, decisions that prioritize life and dignity, and a mindset that combines faith with method. Choosing to control means allowing emotional narratives to override judgment, leaving room for manipulation and pain. The choice is not merely symbolic. It translates into local policies, family routines, and human relationships that can be reconstituted or broken by words, even those written decades ago, in faded ink. Before we move on to a more technical analysis of the evidence and the reactions that followed the disclosure, it's worth reflecting. How do we want our community to respond to the unknown? With fear and isolation, or with responsible curiosity and active compassion? The journey we propose here is not about proving something true at any cost, but about building pathways that allow the truth to emerge in a way that strengthens, not destroys. This requires humility, balance, and decisions that respect both the sacred and the human, because, ultimately, revelations exist to transform lives, not to divide people. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And as we delve into the details of the evidence, the expert analysis, and the personal stories that emerged after the release, let's keep this balance in mind. Courage to investigate, prudence to act. Comment below. This resonates with me. I want to read how this recap resonates with you before we dive into the evidence and the voices that shaped the fate of these words. If you've come this far with me, thank you for walking this path of questions and discoveries. Your presence matters more than you can imagine. If this content has shed any light or sparked concern, please subscribe to the channel so I can continue bringing you thoughtful investigations, interviews, and more context that helps transform curiosity into understanding. This is how we maintain this serious and ongoing work. Also, leave a like if you felt the conversation resonated. This simple gesture shows that we're connected and fosters the possibility of moving forward with greater care and depth. Oh, and write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." We'll read and respond to any stories that come in, because listening to your experiences is an essential part of this journey. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and stay with me there. The conversation continues, and there's much more to discover together, responsibly and with an open heart.